Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and as I always like to say, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can check us out on whatever fine podcast platforms are out there. If you're listening to us and you want to see what me and my guests look like, you can check us out on YouTube. Please leave us a review. Let your friends know, let your family members know, let your friends and family members know where you can find, where they can find the Lunch Hour Podcast. We have a real special show today. Very excited to have our guest join us. His name is Emmett Tyrrell Jr. He's an American Conservative magazine editor, book author, and columnist, best known as the founder and editor-in-chief of the American Spectator, a conservative magazine that has played a pivotal role in U.S. conservative political commentary since its inception in the late 1960s. It's one of the magazines that helped me sort of formulate and discover myself as a conservative. He was born in Chicago, Illinois, grew up in a politically engaged environment, started the American Spectator as a campus magazine while attending Indiana University, originally under the name The Alternative. Over the years, the publication grew in stature and became a leading voice for American conservatism, offering critiques of liberal policies and figures. Throughout his career, Tyrrell has been an unapologetic advocate for traditional conservative values. His writings have spanned a range of topics, including politics and culture and the media. Besides his work with the American Spectator, he's written for numerous other publications and authored several books that provide a conservative perspective on U.S. politics and society. His latest book is How Do We Get Out of Here? Half a Century of Laughter and Mayhem at the American Spectator, from Bobby Kennedy to Donald Trump, released this year on September 26, 2023. Bob Tyrrell, so glad you could join us today.
Glad to be here.
So let's talk about this. You know, it's not just that the American Spectator was unique, being one of very few conservative publications at a time, but it was also a publication that was not afraid to show its humorous side and skewer those folks on the left with humor and satire and cleverness. I know when I went to William and Mary, we had a conservative paper that was build itself in that model. Talk about why humor is so important in terms of dealing with these very important issues and very important figures.
Well, humor is the best way to report on what's going on in Washington. And
Yes.
so I'm glad to do it. I've had a wonderful life, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share it with your audience and with the audience of all my readers. It's been a good time. A lot of people tend to say that a lot of memoirists tend to grump and groan and talk about how miserable life was for them. Life was a bowl of cherries for me. I had a wonderful time, and so I want to share it with you guys.
Well, it's a concept of being a happy warrior, and I think happy warriors are so vitally important. Fred Smith at the Competitive Enterprise Institute comes to mind. Fred was always a happy warrior in terms of dealing with the free market, limited government issues, always wanting to approach things with more than a little degree of cleverness. Let's go back for a second, because one of the things I've talked about on this show, and I've talked about it with folks on the left as well as on the right, I had Bob Levy from the Washington Post on. The left has turned its back on the issue of free speech and the dedication to free speech. Certainly, when we're talking about these issues and talking about satire, free speech is a vital essence. What happened to the left? Why has the left lost their way when it comes to protecting this vital value of freedom?
Because they're committed to a set of principles that don't make any sense. And as a result, they're a little glum and gloomy. But we make sense out of what we're talking about, and that's why we are pretty much a happy crew at the American Spectator.
I mean, it is this issue of, the left is so big on trying to follow the science, yet it seems like leftist policy over the last 2 generations, I would say, has become completely and thoroughly detached from reality, right? I mean, obviously, if you have no objective metric of what's going on and you make everything subjective, it means you can make society malleable. Am I right or wrong here? What are your thoughts here?
What they're committed to across the board has been proven wrong.
Yeah.
There is no free lunch. And as a consequence, they have a lot to answer for. And they're trying to answer for it with lies, frankly.
Yeah.
And they're the people that call us liars. We aren't liars. We tell the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because one of the things that I'm working on in the policy roles that I have, is this issue of drilling and gas prices. And it's a situation in which I was getting ready to testify up in Congress. It's not happening right now. But one of the things I was going to focus on is President Biden promised during the election that he was going to end drilling. We're going to have no more drilling, he famously said. And the Biden administration has taken steps to do that. They've taken steps to end drilling on public lands and out in the Gulf of Mexico. And yet they're at the same time trying to say that they're not ending drilling. This is what we're talking about here in terms of the lies. We're just telling the truth about what they're doing. Am I right or wrong here?
You are right, and they'll keep doing it because they can't tell the truth.
Yeah.
The truth is they've been wrong on practically everything. We've spent so much on the war on poverty, and they've gotten nothing out of it. Just for an example.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I want to talk about this to completely shift gears in a complete and total non sequitur. Because the book, which is How Do We Get Out of Here? Half a Century of Laughter and Mayhem at the American Spectator, from Bobby Kennedy to Donald J. Trump. Where do you sit in this resurgence of Bobby Kennedy Jr. as a force in American politics? I mean, I'm surprised at the resurrection of Bobby Kennedy Jr. Are you as surprised as I am, or do you sort of recognize he has also become a truth teller in certain ways?
Well, yes, but I'm surprised that he's come from no place to return to the public light. And he's doing a good job of it on most things.
Yeah.
And that's why I've been in contact with him. I think
Good.
he ought to be on our side on some things. Bob Kennedy Jr., Sr. was partially on our side, partially on the side of the left. It's not often noted, but if you read the book, you'll find that he was rather conservative on some things. He was attacked by the New York Times for his conservative streak, but he retrieved it by out for. And it's a great question: is where would he be today?
Right.
And where would John be today? I take this up in the book.
Well, we'll talk about that. Not that I want you to give away too much in the book. In the book, of course, we want you to go get it. It's wherever fine books are sold. But talk about that, how the Democratic Party has left so many people. Actually, I want you to talk about this, but I had a conversation yesterday as well with somebody about the issue of conservatives of a certain age who were born as New Deal Democrats or raised early on as New Deal Democrats. They're very conservative now, but they will still defend FDR and the New Deal. Is that kind of what we're also seeing, and where in asking the question about where JFK might be today or RFK Sr.? I mean, is that bound up in this?
I don't know. I don't really know. I do know that what you say is true. The whole neoconservative movement was made up of ex-liberals, Gene Kirkpatrick, Irving Kristol. These are all people that I treat in the book, and it's interesting to look back on them 30 years later and see what they were doing then and what they're doing today. Of course, what they're doing today is pumping up flowers.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. It's reminded of the famous video on Saturday Night Live projecting where the Saturday Night Live cast members would be, from 1978 onward. And John Belushi is essentially dancing on everybody's grave. Not that we're dancing on people's graves, but the point is it makes the point that everybody's pushing up daisies. So one of the theses that I talk about is one of the great failures of the 1960s. And I think some of this is what you get to when you talk about Bobby Kennedy being a conservative in certain ways and being attacked by the New York Times, is that the left as they railed against what they perceived as abuses of government power, when the left came into power, they didn't take steps to curtail that power. And I submit it's because they knew that at some point in time, they would want to use that power against their political enemies. Talk about this, the role of the expansion of government and the ability of that government to be used against someone's political enemies, and how the left has adopted this.
We have to talk about it very much. I mean, it's there. Look at Biden. I mean, how did Biden get in the trouble he's in? He just ignored the restraints that were put on him by the founding fathers.
Yeah.
And that's why he's where he is. I mean, it's unthinkable that a conservative would be in the mess he's in.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. It's, there's a certain level of respect for those institutions and those constitutional precepts. I mean, have we reached a point, in terms of our political discourse and how the two parties comport with one another and the polarization in America, have we reached a point where we are beyond satire? I mean, Tom Lehrer, the famous songwriter, said, any society that gives Henry Kissinger the Nobel Peace Prize is itself beyond satire, and that's why he retired from music. I mean, are we beyond satire now and beyond parody with where our politics are today?
Well, the liberals don't even attempt it. They're stuck with their serious mode.
Yeah.
We're the only people that attempt it, and sometimes we fall flat in our face, but other times I think we're pretty funny. And I think this book is a pretty funny book. And I want to point out that I wrote it with the intent of entertaining people, and I think I've entertained quite a few people with this book. I think I'll entertain quite a few more.
So let's sort of set the Wayback Machine. And, we have the Bob Tyrrell of 2003. You have the ability to go back in time and talk to the Bob Tyrrell that is founding the American Spectator at Indiana University. What do you're telling him about the society, American society in 2023. What do you think your past self would be most surprised about the world today, whether it's Washington or the world generally or politics? What would he be most surprised at?
Well, I say in the book that this has been a period for at least 40 years of episodic chaos. And then there'd be a breakthrough of episodic calm, and then there'd be episodic chaos again. We're right now in the longest period of episodic chaos that we've had. And we're going to watch and see what happens. But it is a time of chaos. And that's what we're living through right now.
So the Spectator as a voice, really speaking truth to power, or truth to folks who are not in power, but the point is telling the truth about what's going on. Why is it that we have so many folks who are? One would think that the world would have seen the example that the Spectator was leading in terms of truth telling, and have worked to adopt it, but we seem to have moved in the opposite direction with most aspects of major media. Why are we in a world where, because I think this helps lead to the chaos, why are we in a world today where so few of those who are in the business of talking about what's going on are so afraid to tell the truth?
Well, I don't know if they're afraid to tell the truth, but they aren't telling the truth.
Yeah.
And we're doing it, and we're having a good time, and they're having a bad time. I wonder about it myself. Why are they so glum? Why are they so grim? Can't they come up with something? Why don't they call me up? I'll tell them what's funny about conservatives if they want to know. But I don't think I'll be getting a phone call very soon.
Yeah, you're right. It is a certain degree of glumness and resignation. And certainly when we talk about sort of their obsession with Donald Trump, and some of it has to do with the fact that they want Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee because they think he's the weakest candidate and they think they can beat him. But they really are sort of angry and obsessed in a way, right? You know this, back in the late 1960s and into the 70s, the leftists were angry, but there was a certain degree of joy that some of them were taking. but they're all just so serious and so angry all the time. Go ahead.
They are
Yeah.
all serious. They are all angry. And we have a supper club at the American Spectator called the Saturday Evening Club, which never meets on Saturday.
Yes.
I have spent time years trying to get some liberal to attend the Saturday Evening Club. I've invited them as my special guests, and
Yes.
I've gotten 2 out of about 35 invited.
Wow.
Two.
Is it
Those two insisted on insulting the people that were there and calling us all racists.
It's funny because I go the opposite way. I went to a very progressive high school in New York, and I take every opportunity to go back. I went to the Fieldston School in Riverdale, New York, where J. Robert Oppenheimer was an alumnus. So I take every opportunity to go up and be the happy warrior and talk about issues and things of that nature. I wonder about this because you are obviously not just a student of Cold War history, but you lived through the widest sweep of the Cold War. There is a certain degree of Soviet apparatchik or communist apparatchik, sort of the Zampolit, the political officer mentality to the way a lot of I look at first Jen Psaki and then Corinne Jean-Pierre and the ultra seriousness and how dare you question the party orthodoxy. There's a certain parallel I think that can be drawn between what they're doing and the apparats of the sweep of the Soviet Union, don't you think?
Well, yes, but you have to remember, I've been thrown for a loop the last few weeks last few days when Putin came out in favor of Donald Trump and supported Donald Trump's side in this controversy with Donald Trump in the courts.
Yeah,
I'm still trying to figure that one out. Is Putin trying to joke or pull our legs, or is he serious? Does he think Donald's getting a raw deal? I think he's probably serious. He's got a little humanity in him.
Well, I think I would say may not just be humanity, but it's also.
I'm joking.
There you go. Okay, good. Sometimes sarcasm, I can miss those things, Bob. It's a situation in which he wants to foment chaos. We have Vladimir Putin, who was a KGB apparatchik. The KGB was playing around in American politics, the Soviet Union playing around in American politics throughout its history. And so to me, it was no great mystery that Vladimir Putin would want to play around and foment chaos and turn us against each other at the same time pumping up all kinds of nonsensical ideals on the left. But it just, I see. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, in this book, I claim to counsel, and I think I wisely counseled 5 presidents and 5 Republican presidents and 1 Democratic president. The Democrat was Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. I counseled him to go at the jockey club to go over to his table and sit down. And you know what he did? He went over and sat down.
There you go. That's good. I'm reminded of when I see these folks in the movie Dr. Zhivago, which remains one of my favorites, of the character of Strelnikov, the hardline Bolshevik with his steel-rimmed glasses, completely serious and humorless and uncompromising. I know I seem to be harping on that point, but I think if we're going down this road and understanding that what they're looking for is, I would think, Marxist transformation of the United States, that there's something there, in other words.
No, I don't know that I follow you, but I'll tell you this: Putin and that crowd that's in charge of Russia today, they're not communists. They're more mafia.
Yeah,
and that's really true, and it's frightening to watch them in action.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that definite degree of thuggery, which gets us into your great speech at the American Spectator anniversary dinner last year, I think it was. I was there. I had a marvelous time. It was so fun to hear you speak. But you made an impassioned and eloquent plea as to why this conflict, we as conservatives cannot dismiss this conflict. And talking about Putin and the thuggery of Putin, talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, I do think that Putin is far from a communist. I don't know. Yeah. He is a mafioso.
Yeah, a thug.
A thug, and that's what he deals with. And and I'm shocked to hear him say the kind of pro-enterprise, free enterprise things. Wow. When that's not exactly where he came right. from, or where he comes from now. I think all he comes from now is the realm of the thugs. And go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was out of gas.
Yeah. So I mean, it comes to this situation. And I just so you understand, I have a degree in Soviet studies. So and when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I'm inclined to say that for many, many years, even the Soviets weren't particularly communist. I mean, obviously it was the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, but it was really a thugocracy. It was you had sort of rule by thuggery, and certainly they weren't capitalists. But the point being that, when you have a thug who comes out of the secret police and then rises to power, he's going to take that thuggery with him. I wrote in 2014 about the lack of seriousness of the Obama administration towards the Russian threat then. They didn't take it seriously. Can you talk about how the roots of what we're seeing in Central Europe had their play in the Obama administration circa 2012 and beyond, Obama telling Medvedev that they would have greater flexibility after the election and then doing nothing when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. Talk about how that sowed the seeds of what we're seeing today.
Well, that shows you how the Russians, the Russian communists, the Russian mobocracy, they're serious about politics.
Yeah.
It's an element in American public life that's not serious at all about politics, and yet they win time and time again. Why do they win time and time again? I say in this book, the liberals or the conservatives have a kind of a libido for politics, which is the libido of a gentleman.
Yes.
The liberals have the libido of a sex maniac. That's why, and I talk about that in the book. I think it's very interesting. Time and time again, we lose to them, to the liberals, because we're soft pedal politics in a way that is unthinkable amongst liberals.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking about this with my colleague at Real Clear Policy, Jerry Rogers, that very issue about sort of the hardball. It's like this case that has arisen down in Virginia with the House of Delegates race. A woman, a Democratic candidate for a Virginia House of Delegates race, we now understand, was an online sexual performer. And the story is exposed not by the right-wing press, but by the Washington Post. And there is no immediate call for this woman to step away from the election. She has doubled down in this, saying this is an invasion of privacy. And listen, not that I'm going to go out there and sort of criticize what people do in their bedrooms, but the bottom line here is we have a real question as to whether or not she can run. Her response is, this is an invasion of my privacy. My point is that we're in an era in which one party has no shame. We know that if this were a Republican who were caught like this, the Republican would be out immediately. Is that, and actually let me ask you this, is that sort of how Donald Trump changed this, is that he shows what happens when you can be pugnacious and push back against the Democrats as hard as they give and point out the hypocrisy?
Well, look, Donald is, I end the book with a discussion of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has almost single-handedly taken on the left.
Right.
And he's now got Putin on his side. I'm for Putin and him.
Wow. Yes. Which is crazy. I mean, listen, you can't tell the players without a scorecard, as they used to say, how these things line up.
Yeah.
So it's, well, I mean, listen, there's so many places we could go with regards to the Trump situation. But
Trump,
sorry, go ahead.
I was one of the first people to come out for Donald Trump. And I have advocated his cause for quite a while. But Donald Trump took every punch that was thrown at him and tried to return the punch. If Donald Trump had been Ronald Reagan, he wouldn't have. He'd have ignored the liberals, and he would have gone on to great things. Donald Trump accomplished some very great things, but he didn't end the Cold War. He didn't lower the taxes the way Ronald Reagan did, and he should have contented himself with that exercise rather than the fighting with the liberals constantly. I mean, it hurt him. I mean, he's not the man that I supported back in the last election. He's a different man, and it's a shame because he did a great job for a while there.
Absolutely. And listen, in my bailiwick, the regulatory work that I do, he's the first president in modern history to keep regulatory costs constant over time. He came in and regulatory costs were $2.25 trillion annually. He left. They were $2.25 trillion annually. That's never happened. But I think you're right. I think there's a cycle that's at work here, isn't it? Where Donald Trump's election broke the brains of so many on the left. And then I think Trump losing the election in 2020, we don't have to talk about, election chicanery, but I think that in effect sort of broke him in a way. And now it's created this vicious cycle. Do you think I'm describing that accurately?
No, you are describing it accurately. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. Somebody ought to whisper in his ear, Donald, lay off. Let them destroy themselves. Don't bother don't join in with them. Let them destroy themselves. And he hasn't done that. He loves to fight.
Yes.
But if he loves to fight, he ought to join the women's wrestling class or something.
Yeah, it's one of those things where my colleague Jerry has talked about the issue of the adults, sort of somebody whispering in his ear. Not that I want to see a return to the smoke-filled back rooms at conventions.
I do.
Okay, well, talk about this because my friend Jerry would appreciate this.
Are you up in Chicago, or are you wherever you are? Mayor Daley, the first Mayor Daley, showed the way for politics for years up there. He had the best run city in the United States, and he ran it from a smoke-filled room. I'd join in on the smoke-filled room, and we're so far removed from the day of the smoke-filled room. You used to get really professional politicians in office. Now you get amateurs. I mean, Obama was more of a entertainer than a serious politician.
Yeah.
He's not the only one. Most of the Democrats are entertainers. They're not politicians.
Yeah, we certainly are seeing that, and everybody who gets all of the sort of the press, and the press loves those stories and loves giving them attention because they're good for a headline. I tell a story about a congressional primary that I was involved in. I was a Republican Party official, and I had to broker an agreement between two candidates in order to make sure that we won a seat. We'd had a bloody primary. We lost the seat to a Democrat. It should have been a safe Republican seat, and I had two Republicans sit down and duke it out, and we wound up coming away from there with one of them running and one of them not running, and Republicans regained that seat. So I understand that. Here's my concern, right, is that let's assume for a moment that we had that smoke-filled back room. Would Donald Trump listen to the outcome, or would he just sort of go off and do his own thing anyway?
Well, he'd always do his own thing.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, I worked for him as an amateur or as a unpaid associate, and I saw he went his own way time and time again, and he didn't need any advisors. And some of the times his advice was very good from himself, but it only got him so far.
And well, is it, sorry, go ahead.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it was a situation in which when Donald Trump was elected, and I was a Trump skeptic going in, I wrote an op-ed about executive branch power a couple weeks before he got elected. But then he started appointing the right people to offices, and that was good. But there was a moment in which Donald Trump was really trying to do things, trying to get an infrastructure bill passed, trying to solve the immigration problem and brokering a deal with Democrats. And because Trump's election had broken their brain, they couldn't come together to give him any kind of a victory. That's a very bad place for America to be, where even when a president is being conciliatory, that the opposition party can't come together when it's about winning overall. Your thoughts on that?
When have the liberals ever come and congratulated a conservative?
That's true.
I don't recall it.
Right. It's funny you say that, because I had someone online, a Hollywood producer type, who was lambasting, still is angry about George W. Bush and George W. Bush's election and George W. Bush in the Iraq War, and it's like, even though the Bushes have been very they have been anti-Trump for the most part, and folks within the Bush circle, the Cheneys, by another example, and yet they don't get any credit amongst the left. The left still hates them almost as much as they hate Trump.
Of course not.
Yeah,
that's just the way they are.
Yeah,
they are. I don't want to have. I've already denigrated politics.
Sure,
but they are very, very hardcore political junkies, and we aren't. We have, as I say, the political libido of a gentleman. They have the political libido of a sex maniac.
Yeah, and we're talking with Bob Tyrrell. He's the author of How Did We Get Out of Here? Half a Century of Laughter and Mayhem at the American Spectator, from Bobby Kennedy to Donald J. Trump. Bob, I mean, it's an amazing career that you still have, because you're still writing, you're still at it, which is great. I don't want to give away too much from the book, but are there any sort of favorite moments that come to mind over your career from college age to today that sort of step out there and you say, this was a great day, this was a great event, this was a great happening?
Well, the Trooper Gate story, Tom Wolfe said it was the best story, the most important story published in the whole 20th century. I mean, it changed our view of women in politics. It changed our view of sex in politics. It changed our view of what we could say about politics. And Bill Clinton's is still cursing that we can say anything we want about politics. And I'll tell you another interesting story that's in this book. Ronald Reagan was very close to me, or I was very close to Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, he wanted to lower taxes. He wanted to end the Cold War, but he also wanted to change our culture. And Deaver and Jim Baker and these people didn't want to do that. So I kind of finagled my way into the office with him, and I tried to help him change the culture. And I have the research is all in the book. He tried very hard to change the culture, but he couldn't do it, and he eventually gave up. But that's one of the things it's very, very rarely reported on, but it should be discussed more. It's a major break, a major demarche.
Yes.
In the Reagan administration.
Let me ask you this, because you mentioned the Trooper Gate story, which had to do with Bill Clinton and his sex scandals. And one of the things that I'm realizing now is that we're at a point where we really have a 96-hour window from when a scandal breaks to when somebody is out of their position, whether it's an elected official or whether it's someone in a position of power at an organization. If someone can weather those first 96 hours, I think it's pretty assured that they can stay. And I think about Ralph Northam, right? When the Ralph Northam Ku Klux Klan outfit picture story broke, I had a Democratic operative email me and say, well, he's done. And I'm like, no, 96 hours. If he's still there on Tuesday, he's going to stay in. And sure enough, he stayed in office. Am I right or wrong here? Are we now at a point where if someone
right.
can...
Yeah, you're right when you're dealing with liberals.
Yeah.
But only when you're dealing with conservatives, the only one I can think of that is still standing is Donald Trump.
Right. That's exactly it. It's one of those things where if the left says they want to scalp, they're going to get a scalp. They wanted Donald Trump's tax returns. By Jove, they were going all bent to get Donald Trump's tax returns. They want him to be impeached. They want him to be indicted. All of these things. I mean, Bob, it's a book that is 50 plus years in the making. It's called "How Do We Get Out of Here?" Half a Century of Laughter and Mayhem at the American Spectator. Just before I let you go, we could talk about laughter. Talk about the mayhem side of it. Talk about mayhem at Indiana and what you guys were doing way back when, because I think that's important, again, for the conservative warriors of today to understand.
Well, what we were doing, and I'm not sure that what we were doing then, we were college kids.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's relevant to the political situation today.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think the episodic chaos is out there. It's going on all the time. And as I point out in the book, episodic chaos is a major problem for Americans to deal with. And they're going to have to deal with it at some point.
Well, Bob Tyrrell, listen, everybody go out and get the book. I have not had a chance to read it yet. I look forward to reading it myself. It's the next one on my list. So go and check it out. The book is How Do We Get Out of Here? Half a Century of Laughter and Mayhem at the American Spectator, from Bobby Kennedy to Donald Trump. Bob Tyrrell, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew. I had a good time. But then I always have a good time.
Yes, listen, we got to listen. If we're not having a good time, then why bother doing these things? This has been another episode of The Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.